at 68 years old, in a very meandright spent my days sleeping on the floor of an abandoned garage, the track of motor oil. With my son's cruel words still echoing in my mind. The thought of inheriting anything from my late husband Roberto seemed like a cruel joke at that moment, huddled in the darkness with a sticky trembling in my hands. But I didn't know yet what that told he would unlock secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my son, and myself. My name is Susana Garcia. And this is a story of how my greatest heartbreak became my salvation. Roberto and I had been married for 42 years. We built a life together in Mexico City, a beautiful penthouse with views of the entire city, years of companionship. And what I thought was complete honesty between us. I was a successful businessman, careful with money, thoughtful with his time. We traveled together, celebrated our anniversaries in romantic destinations, and grew old side by side. I believed in every important detail of his life, every significant decision, every meaningful expression. It was wrong Roberto died after a brief illness. Sedacte said it was his heart ironic. In a way, because his heart had always seemed so strong to me. The day after his funeral. I was on Javier and I sat in the office of Abogado Chávez to hear a reading of the will. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to the funeral. Javier looked immaculate in his tailored suit, his expression already calculating as the lawyer prepared to read the documents. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. To my son, Javier Garcia, I live our apartment in Mexico City and my principal investment portfolio. I felt so well till slightly. After 42 years of marriage. After sharing everything with this man, my son was inheriting the most visible symbols of our wealth. And then the lawyer continued to my beloved wife, Susana Garcia, I live a property located at Avenida Industrial 1420, including the garage and all its contents. A garage I couldn't process it. My mind went blank. A garage? After 4 decades of marriage, Roberto had left me a garage. I must have looked as confused as he felt. Because Javier immediately placed his hand on my shoulder, to family, and leaned down to whisper, "Don't worry. Mom, I'll make sure you're taken care of." So words were supposed to be reassuring, but they felt like a threat wrapped in false comfort. That night, when we returned to the penthouse, the home Roberto and I had shared for 15 years, Javier wasted no time. I placed my suitcase by the entrance with casual efficiency. I think it would be better if you found somewhere else to stay, I said in that cold, business-like tone he'd affected over the years. The penthouse is mine now. It's in the will. I have colleagues coming tomorrow to discuss renovating that office. And I need to start making changes. I stared at him, feeling small and helpless. But where am I supposed to go? My voice came out thin. Barely a whisper, shrugged with such indifference, it felt like a physical blow. You could stay with the Elena for a while. Or there's always that garage that left you, and actually left, as though the idea of me living in a garage was the funniest thing he'd had in years. What's that going to be good for anyway? Put up a mechanics shop at garaje. That's when he said it. So words that would scare my soul. You're nothing but a useless old woman. Mom, what would you even do with a real inheritance? That no, you wouldn't be able to handle it. The cruelty was so sudden, so unlike the sonnet I'd raised, that I couldn't find any words to respond. I simply grabbed my suitcase and pace, along with the key the lawyer had given me, and left. I drove through the city without direction. Tears blamed my vision, asking myself over and over how I'd failed to see what my son had become. How had I missed a moment when ambition turned into coldness, when pride transformed into contempt? By midnight, I found myself on an unfamiliar street in the industrial district, staring at a neglected garage with a padlock on its door. My hands shook as I inserted the rusty key into the lock. The door creaked open, and I swept my flashlight across the darkness, preparing myself to find exactly what I expected: gold tools, broken equipment, perhaps some junk Roberto had stored, and forgotten about. What I found instead stopped my heart. The garage wasn't filled with trash. Instead, carefully arranged and covered with white sheets, were 3 vehicles. Even covered, I could make out distinctive shapes. With trembling fingers, I pulled a sheet from the first car. And my broadcast. An Aston Martin DB5 from 1964, painted in immaculate silver, the exact same model that Sean Connery had driven in the James Bond films. Roberto loved so much. The car gleamed as if it had just rolled off the assembly line. Not as if it had been sitting in this dark garage for years. Roberto, I whispered into the silence, what were you doing? In 42 years of marriage, my husband had never mentioned that I collected cars. There was no hint of this passion. No evidence of this investment, no sign of this secret life. with shaking hands y uncovered the second vehicle da Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Guiyuan, from 1956, its iconic real windows and elegant lines instantly recognizable. The dead car was a Ferrari 275 GTB4 from 1967. It's the red, reminding me of the wine, Roberto Heredé da ninguna. Each car came with a LED folder containing ownership documents and meticulous maintenance records. Even someone without expertise could see these weren't just beautiful automobiles, they were museum quality treasures. An envelope was taped to the wall with my name written in Roberto's unmistakable handwriting. When he flipped the light switch, the garage transformed. This wasn't an abandoned building, it was a professionally equipped sanctuary for automobiles. Climate control, specialized flooring, security systems, everything had been carefully planned. He sank into a leather armchair and opened the envelope with shaking hands. My dear Susana, the letter began, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've discovered what I've come to consider my final gift to you. We had to stop reading to breathe. Tears streamed down my face as he continued. Roberto explained that 6 years ago, he'd been given a diagnosis as a progressive heart failure. The doctors had given him 5 years. He'd outlived that prognosis by a year, but he'd known now what time was limited. He'd spent that time building something to secure my future. I wrote about how he'd noticed a change in Javier over the past decade. The ambitious boy with race had become something harder, more calculating. Roberto had watched how Javier spoke to me when he thought no one was listening, how he dismissed my opinions, how his respect for me had eroded into barely concealed contempt. And Roberto had been afraid of what would happen if he left everything divided between us, afraid that Javier would find a way to control my portion, to manage it for my benefit as he would say it. So he'd made a deliberate choice. Javier would receive what looked like the valuable part of the penthouse, the visible investments, the status symbols. But what he held now, Roberto wrote, was the true wealth. The 3 automobiles alone were worth approximately $12 million than Ambe. Unable to comprehend it, but the cars were only the beginning. Roberto had hidden a safe behind a photograph in his office tome, the picture of us living in San Miguel de Allende. Our NBC trip 35 years ago, the combination was our NBC date. Inside that safe, he would find documents for several properties he'd purchased over the last 6 years, all placed in a trust that would transfer to me upon his death. There were also bank accounts and investment portfolios that would ensure my comfort for the rest of my life. I found the photograph where he described and opened the safe with trembling hands. Inside was a thick folder titled Complete Inventory of Assets for Susana Garcia. As I read through the documents, the numbers and property descriptions bled before my eyes. Apartment buildings in Guadalajara, commercial property in Monterrey, a small vineyard in Baja California, stock portfolios, bonds, investments in various sectors. The total sum at the bottom of the page left me gasping for air. In return to the letter, Roberto wrote that he knew it was overwhelming. I apologized for keeping it secret. But as the portfolio had grown, he'd realized that revealing it too early could put me in danger if Javier discovered the extent of these assets. He'd anticipated exactly what would happen. He'd foreseen how Javier would react. I believe, Roberto wrote, that character reveals itself most clearly in moments of inheritance. Javier was receiving both the test and the legacy. And his beloved, was receiving the means to live the rest of my life exactly as he chose, without owing anything to anyone. That first night, I slept on the sofa in the small office adjoining the garage. In the morning, I discovered how thoroughly Roberto had planned everything. The office had a bedroom with a shower, a small refrigerator stacked with what and basic food, and even a closet filled with new clothes in my size. Textile attached. The daylight revealed that what had appeared neglected from the outside was actually a carefully maintained facility, a deliberate camouflage hiding the treasures within. After a simple breakfast, I called the number Roberto had provided, Carlos del Bosque. His trusty advice and dile. And said on the second ring, Señora Garcia, I've been expecting your call, said warmly. First, please accept my condolences for your loss. Your husband was not just a client, he was a friend. 2 hours later, an elegantly dressed man, in his 60s. Carlos was exactly as his voice had suggested, distinguished. Impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket, Bible de Pechis on elbows. I explained that Roberto had begun purchasing these vehicles approximately 6 years ago. Each acquisition carefully researched for authenticity, provenance, and investment potential. But why cars? He asked. Still struggling to reconcile this hobby with the husband, I thought he knew completely. Carlos smiled gently. 11. He explained to me that he wanted to leave you something tangible. Something beautiful that would bring you joy simply by looking at it. Unlike stacks or bands, these automobiles could be appreciated in multiple ways, as art, as engineering marvels, as historical objects, and as investments. I wanted to leave you something you could see and touch, not just numbers and paper. I felt a not forming my routes and understood how Roberto thought so practical. Yet so deeply considered. The collection is now worth approximately $12 million, Carlos continued, but the value has been steadily increasing. These particular models are considered among the best investments in the classic automobile world. What am I supposed to do with them? Yes, whatever you wish. Señora Garcia, you can sell them individually or as a collection. You can keep them as an investment or even trade them, though that would slightly diminish their value. There's no rush to decide. Your husband paid for secure storage and maintenance for the next 5 years. Over the following days and weeks, he reviewed the documents Roberto had left behind. He gradually began to understand the magnitude of his financial machinations beyond the automobiles. He built an impressive collection of income-generating properties, all structured to transfer to me smoothly after his death. One set of documents in particular caught my attention, said it to a modest but beautiful house in Playa del Carmen, a beach city we visited several times and always loved. Roberto had purchased it 4 years ago, fully finished and ready to live in the actually Heredé house, not just this valuable garage. That evening, my phone rang. Javier's name appeared on the screen. He hesitated before answering. Mom, where are you? His voice was irritated, rather than consent. The Elena says you haven't contacted her. I'm fine. Javier, he said, keeping my voice calm. I found a place to stay. Well, I need you to come pick up the rest of your things from the penthouse. The gates are starting tomorrow and everything needs to be out. No apology. No acknowledgement of his cruelty. Just demands and disrespect. I felt a strange calm settle over me. When would be convenient? Yes, tomorrow morning before 9 a.m. I had meetings all day. I looked at the document spread before me, proof of Roberto's current profound love. I thought about the son who could evade his mother without hesitation because she was an obstacle to his plans. And I made a decision. I'll be there, I said the next morning. I arrived at the penthouse at exactly las 8:45, taking care with my appearance. I wore one of the new outfits from the guest closet, a simple but elegant navy pantsuit that fit perfectly. Javier opened the door with his phone in hand. Barely looking at me, as he entered. The place already felt different and empty, cold. Several of my decorative items were gone. And the family photographs that had hung in the hallway had been removed finally, I said. I packed most of your personal things. The gates will be here at las 9:30, so we need to be quick. No good morning. No question about where I'd spent the night after a room out. Just agency for his own plans. Good morning to you too, Javier, I replied. My voice stronger than I expected. I see you've already started decorating. I shrugged, leading me towards the master bedroom where several boxes were stacked. No point waiting. The place needs complete renovation to increase its value. I was already thinking about selling about dismantling the home Roberto and Duno had built together, extracting profit from it and moving on. The casual disdain for our family home had. But I only nodded. What about Roberto's things? He asked Javier. Waved vaguely toward more boxes in the corner. He kept his Rolex and his cufflink collection. The rest is just clothes and old stuff. You can take what you want. The rest goes to charity. Old stuff. He approached the boxes carefully and opened the first one. Inside were the books Roberto treasured his collection of antique fountain pens. The sweater I'd given him last Christmas that still smelled like him. Each item was a piece of the man I'd loved. Now dim what last be our son, he began going through the boxes methodically, setting aside the things that were valuable to me. Javier paced impatiently. Checking his watch every few minutes. Can't you hey? I finally snapped. It's just stuff, Mom. You don't even have a place to store all of this. I really looked at him, for the first time in years. I was handsome like his father, but without Roberto's warmth or compassion. I don't have a place, he said calmly. And I'm going to take that I mean it. These aren't just things. Javier's der memes. Errol, he says, fine, I have calls to make. Just finish by las 9:30. I left without looking back, as he continued selecting items carefully. He moved through stages of grief, not just for Roberto, but for the sanito I'd raised. Had he always been this cold, this cruel? Had he simply refused to see it, making excuses for his increasingly insensitive behavior? At the bottom of a closet, he found something unexpected. Roberto's old leather backpack pushed into a corner. Inside was an envelope with my name and a note. If you find this, Susanna, it's a backup copy of everything in the garage safe, just in case my brilliant, careful husband. Making backups of his backups, when the porter helped me load my things into my car, I looked at the building one last time. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and freedom. The penthouse had been a home filled with memories. But it had never truly been mine, the way Roberto had planned for the garage and its contents to be. I drove out of the city toward the coast highway that led to Playa del Carmen, for the first time since Roberto's death. I wasn't reacting to loss and shock, I was moving intentionally towards something new. The drive to Playa del Carmen showed something in my soul that had been broken since Roberto died. As a road wound through the cliffs, often use of the best blue Caribbean sea, I breathed deep, then I head in weeks. Follow in the actions from the property documents. I eyed the Tamadas stone house, partially hidden behind mature cypress trees. The property wasn't enormous or ostentatious, but it felt welcoming and private. A wooden gate led to a path that wound down the small but beautifully maintained garden. When I opened the door with the key from Roberto's documents, I stopped completely. Every detail seemed to have been chosen with me in mind. The living room had built-in bookshelves, a stone fireplace, with comfortable armchairs in Calescent styles I'd always loved. Natural light poured through large windows, illuminating hardwood floors covered with hand-woven rugs. The kitchen was modern, yet classic, with a breakfast nook overlooking the garden. The master bedroom was cozy, rather than grand, opening onto a private patio with a glimpse of the sea between neighboring properties. But it was the small office beside the living room that finally broke me. Above a simple desk hung a watercolor painting I recognized instantly. Sevena's Canal, where Roberto had proposed to me, painted by a street artist decades ago. We'd lost the original during a move years ago, but here was a perfect copy, as if Roberto had commissioned it from memory. I wept then not the spritz up sabres and twigs, but a gentle release. Roberto had created this place for me with such care, such attention to the things that would bring me comfort and joy. A soft knocked the door interrupted my tears. When I opened it, I found an elegant woman in her 70s with a covered plate in her hands. "Hello," she said warmly, "you must be Susana. I'm Mariana del Carmen, your neighbor. Roberto asked me to look in on you when you arrived." I blinked in surprise. "You knew Roberto?" She nodded, offering me the plate. I came several times over the last few years, preparing the house. I was one of the few people who knew about his plan. It made me promise not to contact you until you came to clean the place. Over tea in the kitchen, Mariana shared details that filled in more gaps. Roberto had been meticulous about doing everything right, she explained. He'd brought photos of our city home, trying to capture my style while creating something that would fit here in Playa del Carmen. She told me that he'd mentioned wanting to provide protection, though he didn't elaborate. He'd said that when he finally died, he might need a friend, someone who understood what it meant to rebuild a life after loss. Over the following days and weeks, I settled into a peaceful routine. I explored the city, met the neighbors, and returned each evening to a home that felt increasingly like mine. On the fourth day, Javier called. I hesitated before answering. "Mom, where are you?" "The same impatient note as before. Tia Elena says you haven't stayed with her. I'm taking some time for myself, Javier," I replied. "I found a place." "What does that mean?" "What place?" "You can't just disappear like this. I'm not going to discuss where I am right now. Is there something specific you need?" A pause. Then his voice shifted to his business tone. "Actually, yes. I've been going through those papers more carefully and found references to additional investments that weren't in the will. I think there might be accounts or properties we don't know about yet." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of references?" "Nothing specific. Just notes about meetings with financial advisors I don't recognize. Some mysterious comments about securing future sets." Javier was suspicious. "I was searching for assets I believed were rightfully his. If there were additional assets, I'm sure Señor Chavez would have mentioned them," I replied. "Maybe your father was just being cautious." "Maybe," Javier said, unconvinced. "Look, when are you coming back to the city? We should talk about this in person. I'm not sure when I'll return. I need this time away to process everything." His frustration came through clearly even over the phone. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just leave without telling anyone where you are." "I'm fine, Javier. I'm not wandering around. I'm not alone. I'm simply taking time to think about everything that's happened." After hanging up, I sat in the garden, thinking about the question Roberto had posed in his letter. Would Javier prove himself worthy of sharing this unexpected wealth? So far, his actions had only confirmed Roberto's concerns about his character. Bad people could change, couldn't they? The compassion that Sonny remembered from years ago had to still exist somewhere inside him 3 months into my new life in Playa del Carmen. I developed a routine that felt increasingly natural. I divided my time between settling the house, exploring my new community, and managing the responsibilities that came with Roberto's unexpected inheritance, with the help of Aten y Patricia del Olmo. I established a comfortable system for overseeing the properties and investments. C. Automobiles remained in their secure garage, maintained by Carlos del Bosque's team. Even drove the Aston Martin on the drilling. Slightly terrifying trip along the coastal highway that made me feel strangely close to Roberto. My relationship with Javier remained tense. We communicated mainly through formal emails about practical matters, as Patricia had predicted. His initial legal attempts to contest the will ended when the lawyers confirmed that Roberto's engagements were included. He was pruning roses in the garden when an unfamiliar car pulled up. A tall, professional-looking woman stepped out with the efficiency of someone accustomed to solving problems. Señora García, I'm Clara Mendoza, Javier's assistant. May I speak with you for a moment? Something in her tense, enchantment beneath the professional exterior gave me a chill away. In the living room, Clara sat on the edge of the armchair, refusing my offer of tea. Señora García, I'm here because Javier has had some serious problems. Asked me to speak directly with you. As he felt you might not answer his calls. What kind of problems? Yes, though a feeling that something bad was happening told me you already knew. Primarily financial. She opened the team folder. The penthouse renovation cost exceeded budget by almost double. There were structural problems that couldn't have been foreseen, requiring significant additional investment. He wasn't surprised. Roberto had mentioned the building's aging infrastructure years ago, but Javier had dismissed his suggestions about maintenance as unnecessary expenses. Additionally, Clara continued, Javier's main investment failed. He put considerable money into a construction project that ran into permitting problems. The details are complicated, but essentially he's facing serious losses with little liquid cash. He maintained a neutral expression. And how does this affect me? Clara shifted uncomfortably. Señora García, to be frank, Javier needs financial help and knows you have the resources to help him avoid bankruptcy and losing the penthouse. It was the request I'd been expecting since our confrontation 3 months ago. Not an apology, not an attempted reconciliation, but a request for money delivered through an intermediary to avoid the shame of asking directly. As Javier considered selling the penthouse? Yes, even have renovated it would probably cover his debts. Explored that option, Clara admitted. Unfortunately, in its current state, mid-renovation, the property would sell at a significant loss. There are also complications with some of the contractors. In other words, Javier had likely quarreled with the construction team, probably about money or his attitude. I appreciate you coming to explain the situation, he said after a moment. Please tell Javier I've heard his request and I'll consider it. Clara looked surprised by the non-committal response. Señora García, the situation is fairly urgent. The foreclosure process could begin in a matter of weeks. I understand, and I'll need time to think about my response. That's all I can of it a day. The next morning, instead of calling Javier immediately, I drove to the city to see the penthouse situation for myself. The porter, recognizing me from years of living there, let me up without calling first. What I found was serious. The house, that had once been elegant, had been almost completely demolished in most areas, with exposed wires and pipes creating a dangerous maze. The construction team was nowhere to be seen. A fine layup dust suggested weeks had passed since anyone had done any work. As I walked through what had been aware of me, I felt a mixture of emotions: sadness for the distraction of spaces filled with memories, frustration at the waste and mismanagement, and gratitude for Roberto's foresight in protecting me. I was examining what damage when he had the front door open. Mom, Javier's voice echoed through the empty space. He appeared in the doorway, and I was struck by how different he looked. His always impeccable appearance had deteriorated. His expensive clothes looked trampled, his face showing the strain of sleepless nights. He had lost weight. The angles of his face, emphasizing how much he resembled Roberto in his most difficult moments. I wanted to see it for myself, he explained, gesturing at the distractions surrounding us. Javier ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he recognized from his childhood. I assume Clara spoke to you yesterday. I nodded. She explained your situation, and I wanted to understand it completely before making a decision. I walked carefully over a pile of discarded materials. This is very different from what you described when you started the renovation. Ese punto. El extra short, humorous sound. Yes, well, things rarely go as planned in construction or in life. Javier, he said gently. What happened with the investment project? Something in my tone seemed to break through his defenses. I said, down on an overturned trash can, looking exhausted, it got in over my head. Se construction opportunity seemed safe. Luxury apartments in a promising area. Rentals were going well. I put in not just the money he had, but borrowed using other properties, including the future value it thought the penthouse would have. And then an environmental inspection found contamination issues that hadn't been disclosed. Se clean up costs made the project unfeasible. Se investors withdrew. I looked down that's a physical and financial distraction. Why didn't you come to me before things reached this point? His face hardened after our last conversation after finding out what they did and your role in it. I guess pride got in the way. Or stubbornness. Both are powerful Garcia family motivators, he admitted. Then Javier asked quietly, have you made your decision about helping me? I looked at him directly. I'm willing to help, Javier, but not without conditions. And not by simply giving you a check to pay your debts. Relief and exhaustion were on his face. What conditions? We need to discuss this properly, he replied, walking towards the door. Not here. Sounded be proof of hasty decisions. Come to Playa del Carmen tomorrow. Let's talk about how to move forward, something that not only solves your immediate problem, but addresses what caused it. It looked like he wanted to argue, to push for an immediate decision, but necessity won over pride. All right, tomorrow. Javier arrived at the house at exactly 1 a.m. the next day. His appearance noticeably more groomed than the day before, an attempt, he assumed, to project control he no longer had. I'd spent the morning preparing, both mentally and physically, arranging the space carefully for our difficult conversation. You have a beautiful view, I commented stiffly as he led him to the back patio, where I'd set out comfortable chairs and a light lunch. That shows well, he agreed. I remembered how much he loves the coast. Javier's face went straight at the mention of Roberto. But he said nothing as he sat down. The patio overlooked a small but beautifully maintained garden that sloped gently, offering glimpses of the Caribbean Sea between neighboring properties. The setting was tranquil, private, and neutral for the difficult conversation we would have after pouring iced tea for both of us. I tend to face my son directly. Before we discuss your financial situation, I'd like to show you something. I handed him a LED folder I'd prepared that morning with selected documents from Roberto's files. These are financial projections and maintenance assessments for the penthouse. Your father had them commissioned 3 years ago. Anticipating major system failures. Javier frowned as he reviewed the pages. That never mentioned any of this, I tried, he acted gently. Several times you dismissed his concerns, saying he was being too cautious, that the expenses were unnecessary. I showed you these reports during his last Christmas visit. Before his diagnosis, a flash of recognition crossed his face. The annoying building evaluation he'd kept bringing up during dinner, it took a sip of tea. Roberto wasn't just being careful. I was trying to prepare you for the situation you're facing now. Javier set the folder aside, his jaw tightening. If you brought me here just to say, I told you so through the no, he interrupted. I'm providing context for my decision to help you. Roberto saw this coming. Not just the building problems, but the pattern of decisions that led to your current crisis. And what pattern is that? His tone was defensive. But genuine confusion lay beneath, prioritizing how things look over what they actually are. Is it simply chasing impressive gains instead of stable growth? Dismissing caution as pointless. Pessimism. He looked at him directly. The same qualities that led you to throw your mother out of her home instead of thinking about what she needed alongside your plans. I had the decency to look ashamed for a moment. I shouldn't have handled that the way he did. No, you shouldn't have. I agreed. The silence fell between us, broken only by the distant sound of waves and occasional sea birds. Javier shifted uncomfortably. Unaccustomed to me being so direct. Throughout his adult life, I'd been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, the one who accommodated his moods. So what are you proposing? I finally asked. What are those conditions for your help? First, complete transparency, he replied. I need to see everything: all accounts, debts, contracts, commitments. Nothing hidden, nothing conveniently left out, and added stiffly, all right. What else? Professional financial management from this point forward. You've shown that your judgment in these matters is compromised by impulsiveness and overconfidence. Any money I give you will be managed through properly supervised funds. His face darkened. So? I'll have an allowance like a child, like someone who's made serious financial mistakes and needs protection while he recovers. He wouldn't call it that, he acted. And the assume you're implying that you'll have control over those funds? No, he said, surprising him, independent administrators with legal accountability. I'm not interested in controlling your life. Just in ensuring that the help I give you actually helps you improve in the long term. Struggle between his desperate need for help and his resistance to losing autonomy. And the penthouse is still mine. The most practical solution would be to sell it, he said, watching his reaction. Even in its current state, it would cover a substantial portion of your debts. You could start again. Maybe in a property that's easy to manage. Sell it. The idea seemed genuinely shocking to him, but it's our family home. It's where you and that it's a physical location, Javier, interrupted gently, memes aren't in the walls. You will get to tear it apart and transform it just a few months ago. Stood suddenly. Walking across the small patio. You don't understand. Selling it would be admitting total failure. Everyone would know, and there it was the heart of his resistance. Not emotional attachment to our family home, but concern about what people would think of him for selling under financial pressure. Appearance over reality. Once again, people already know, he said calmly. The construction has been stopped for months. Contractors have filed liens for payment. The financial community talks about these things. Stop walking, his shoulders sagging, he really did ruin everything. Didn't he? The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. For the first time since Roberto's death, he saw my son behind his defenses confused and finally facing the consequences of years prioritizing appearance. Not everything, he said. My voice opening. But you've created a serious problem that will require equally serious changes to fix. Javier sat down again. Looking suddenly exhausted. So what exactly are you offering? A stretched pet forward, he replied. I'll create a fund that pays your most urgent debts and prevents bankruptcy. Will hire professions to either complete the penthouse renovations or prepare it for sale, depending on what makes most sense after assessment. In exchange, you accept financial supervision for a defined period. You work with a counselor about what's really driven you to this situation. And, post immediately. You make peace for how you treated me after your father died. His eyes met mine. Make peace. What does that mean exactly? It means acknowledging the harm you caused. Understanding that relationships have consequences, just like financial decisions. Javier, I'm not offering help as purely a business transaction. I'm offering it as a mother who believes Hassan can be better than his recent behavior suggests. Something in my words seemed to break through whatever barrier he'd maintained. I looked away, blinking rapidly. It didn't mean the things he said that day, about you being useless. He was angry and took it out on you perhaps, he acknowledged, but those words didn't come from nowhere. They reflected an attitude toward me. Toward all the women generally that you've helped for some time. I didn't deny it, which was small progress. I need time to think about all of this. As I'd finally take the time you need, he replied. But remember that your creditors' deadlines won't adjust to your thinking timeline. Spring returned to Playa del Carmen, painting the garden with explosions of color against the backdrop of the Caribbean. 9 months had passed since Roberto's death, 6 since he discovered what was in the garage. 4 since Javier's financial crisis forced us to have that difficult conversation. After 3 days of silence, Javier called with an unsaid surprise. I'll do whatever it takes. The road from that acceptance wasn't easy. Financial restructuring required weeks of intensive work with accountants and lawyers. Revealing the full extent of Javier's entanglements sank considerably less than he'd initially disclosed. The penthouse required difficult decisions, ultimately culminating in an agreement to